listening to the Remax Real Estate Insight Show, and I'm your host, Jeanette Schneider. Home flipping is a popular topic. Many cable TV shows have created quite a following, and some of the guest hosts on these shows have become household names. In 2018, it is said that 5.6% of all home and condo sales were actually flips. And while low interest rates are bringing in more home buyers and current homeowners in some cases are holding their homes a little longer, the percentage of homes being flipped may be kind of steady, but the market is still ripe for investors, and flipped homes will always be a part of any market. So what if you're a buyer and the home you want to buy is a flipped home? What should you be looking for, and are there specific questions you should be asking? Well, joining me now is Misty Morris. She is an associate with Remax Encore in Clarkston. Welcome to the show, Misty.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure. So we use the term flipped home pretty frequently. Just want to have you have a chance to elaborate and explain what exactly do we mean when we say flipped home?
A flipped home is ideally where an investor or an independent purchase a property or rehab it to basically gain a profit off of it in an effort.
They're not planning to live there.
Correct.
Yeah. All righty. So flipping houses, like I said, it's a part of any real estate market. But what are you seeing in today's market? Are you seeing the number of flipped homes, investors buying to flip up, down, kind of stagnant? Where are you seeing it these days?
It's probably kind of median range, only on account of it's still a seller's market. Mm-hmm. So inventory is low.
Yes.
And with that, the advantage of trying to find a house that is at a lower price range that has that potential of the earning back out of it is a little bit tougher. But there's still a fair share of houses out there right now that are, that have been rehabbed and flipped and available.
Gotcha. So how does an experienced agent such as yourself come into play? If, buyers are looking at homes, they walk through the front door, oh, this is the one I love. How does having an experienced agent help them when it comes to flipped property?
With an experienced agent, obviously, the more you've been doing this, the more houses you see, the more things you tend to notice that, say, a first-time buyer may not notice. Mm-hmm. And one of the big key elements is normally when a property is flipped, they'll also bring in maybe some staging pieces. And while the house is updated and more contemporary to what people might visually want, they tend to get visually distracted by what's in the house and might lack in looking for things that could potentially be wrong with the property.
Okay. And I think you bring up a good point. 'Cause I don't watch a lot of these shows, but I do know that in a lot of the shows that do run on cable when it comes to flipping, the investors ultimately, if they do this kind of as their career, they have a relationship with a stager, so they work together hand in hand.
Yep.
And I'm guessing similar would be true here, so you've got those folks that work together. And like you said, they use a color scheme, they set it up as very pleasing.
Yes.
And I don't know that they're being devious necessarily to take the focus off of something else, but people can get sucked into that. And they're not paying attention to the bones of the house and the real costly things they should be paying attention to.
Correct.
And that's where somebody like yourself can come in and be that other set of eyes, right?
Exactly. Yep.
All right. So from a realtor standpoint, how can you decipher if what we're looking at is a home that has a good flipper or if it's a good, or not? How do you kind of decipher that?
It really comes down to just kind of the overall workmanship of the property when you go in. Obviously, if there are visuals that are you can see things just with your own two eyes that are not correctly done, or if you can see that they took shortcuts in the way that they were doing things, that's one indicator that it may be a flipper that is just kind of starting this and they don't know a whole lot about it. So that would be probably one of the biggest things. Outside of that, the good ones, you can see they tend to have like contract crews. So they have people that they use, for installing. And you can just tell visually the difference between installation of somebody that knows what they're doing or installation of things for somebody that's perhaps maybe doing it themselves to try to cut cost.
Well, I think that's a good point. Because, if somebody's been doing this a while, they've got experience at it, maybe this is their livelihood is flipping homes. Like you mentioned, they probably have a crew that's experienced at doing this. And everybody has to cut their teeth, somewhere if they're deciding to get into this. But if I'm an individual doing it and I'm doing my own work in the house, I may not be the most qualified person to do this. And if I'm now the buyer buying the house, that's something that they want to keep in mind. When you're looking and you pull up a listing, if you're working with me as a buyer, you pull up a listing, you see the house was purchased, let's say in December, back on the market in June. Is that a pretty good indicator this is a flip house just on that data alone, or shouldn't we look at timing as being an indicator?
No, timing's definitely an indicator. And that kind of coincides too with discovering if they are good at flipping or if they're not good at flipping. Sometimes you might see a house was purchased in January and it's on the market in June, and the overall interior shows that they worked quickly and that they may have not spent as much time as they should have. But normally the average, I would say, for turnaround on somebody flipping a property is usually like 6 months to a year.
Okay.
Unless perhaps they run into something that, ties up their time frame overall.
And, we're buying out an existing home from some sellers that currently live in the home. We don't often really research them. But if we're buying a flipped home, like you said, kind of an indicator, is this flipping company a crew? Is this person an individual? Should we be asking questions as a buyer, about the flipper and kind of how often they've done this?
You definitely can ask those questions. Now, like just outside of the profile of the property itself, you can pull public record information that'll show who the property is held with. And that in itself could show you if it's an individual or if it's like a licensed LLC of, say, a property management company, where that data could be something that you could take back and do your own research.
Okay.
But specifically, yes, any questions that a buyer might have are definitely worth asking.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about flipped homes with Misty Morris from Remax Encore in Clarkston. After a short break, we're going to continue our conversation with her about flipped homes and what are some of the little things you can look for that may give you some big clues. After that, we're going to tackle the topic of home ownership, specifically in the African American community. Home ownership rates for African Americans are below 50% here locally, so we're going to talk about the 3 important steps first-time buyers need to take to position themselves to successfully buy a home. Stay tuned for more of the Remax Real Estate Insight Show coming up here on 760 WJR. Welcome back to the Remax Real Estate Insight Show. We're talking about flipped homes. This is a popular topic for those who enjoy real estate and like to invest in it. It's also been a popular theme for TV shows. But what if you're in the market to buy a home and the home you've just fallen in love with is a flip property? What should you be aware of before buying that home? I'm your host, Jeanette Schneider. Back with me is Misty Morris. She's an associate with Remax Encore in Clarkston. So, Misty, from a purchaser standpoint, let's say that I'm walking through the doors and we know this is a flipped home. You've either determined it from who currently owns the home, time frame, whatever. What should I be looking for as a buyer? What are some clues that I should be looking for?
From a buyer standpoint, just when you're walking through the house, kind of looking at everything in the way of opening closet doors, opening cabinet doors, looking under the sink, under the cabinets in the sink in the kitchen, turning on water specifically.
Okay.
Exterior landscaping, if you're on the, exterior of the house, kind of checking the proximity as well. And there's a lot of small things on the inside that people tend to overlook. So, paying attention to things like smoke detectors, have those been replaced? Things that you might not think about.
You wouldn't necessarily think about, yeah.
And then utility is a big one, like furnace, hot water heater, those, larger items that can be costly.
Right.
A lot of the times when a flip is happening, those are the things that if they're pre-existing and they're in working order, usually a flipper will just leave them as opposed to replacing them in a way of kind of cutting cost on their end.
Well, and I guess that makes sense because if I'm trying to put myself in the flipper's perspective. Those are, like you said, high ticket items, and it's going to be hard in some cases to get the money back out of it, where then they've turned the profit that they need to make this work.
Right.
So in a lot of cases, they'll leave that, and they do the pretty cosmetic things, like you said, that attracts people. Whether it's kitchens and bath or other things like that, they'll pay attention to that. I know I was reading an article somewhere that it said, like you were saying, pay attention to the little details. Are the light switches, flush against the wall? Right. If they put crown molding in, is that tight against the corners? Because if they're not doing those little things, right, they probably skipped on the big things too, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
All right, so quality of material then is also a concern, right?
Yep. A lot of the more experienced flippers, usually they have kind of a warehouse, so to speak, of products that they use.
Okay.
Where if they're, buying these things in larger quantities, better products, they can kind of use those in mass production of renovating houses. Whereas someone that's doing it independently and perhaps it's like their first flip, they're probably taking the cheaper approach when buying materials.
Sure.
And it shows with the installation of what they have in the property. So that kind of coincides with going into the kitchen, opening the cabinets, seeing if you can see what type of cabinetry they've used, or did they just paint the cabinets?
Right.
And left what was there.
Yeah. I know one thing I've heard, and you can correct me if it's wrong or if you've come across this, is to pay attention to the front door. That sometimes, especially the more inexperienced flippers that are doing it with the, kind of the cost in mind, will use more of an interior grade door as the front door.
Oh, yeah.
And, and it's like they might be freshly painted. It might look really pretty, but it's not the door you're going to want if you're living in that house. If you're living in that house. So that, again, from a buyer's perspective, it doesn't mean that you don't buy the house. And we're not saying you don't ever consider a flipped house to buy, but you want to go in with the eyes wide open because there may be some things that you're going to pay for on the back end to really put in what you need or want there.
Exactly. Yep.
Alrighty. Now, we always encourage buyers in general to have an inspection done because it really, obviously provides buyers the chance to get a handle on what the property has going on. If there are any imminent or costly repairs in that coming, is it fair to say that this becomes even more important when you're buying a flipped home?
Yes. Well, anytime you're purchasing a home in general, but even more so, with a flip. Specifically, if you have, questions or concerns just based off of your visual, because the home inspector is going to be, another set of eyes. And then secondary to that, he's going to get into attic spaces, crawl spaces, basement areas. They have the ability, obviously, of conducting more tests that just, a standard person can't do. So this in itself is definitely A1 important when it comes to purchasing a flipped property.
Well, I mean, for all of the reasons that you just said, and I mean, as far as electrical panels and things of that, if you've messed with plumbing and electrical, I mean, those are things I want professionals doing. I don't want just Johnny off the street, doing those. And so I'd want an inspector taking a look at that. Well, let me ask you this. Do the changing seasons, and certainly we live in a state that definitely has a change of seasons, can that impact, purchasing a flipped home?
It most definitely can. As far as the changing seasons are concerned, drawing ahead to, say, winter would be an important one. Sometimes if the people have flipped the house and it's now winter and nobody is living there, so they will winterize it, which winterizing is basically just prepping the property for winter elements to assure that pipes don't break and things of that nature. So in a situation, you're purchasing a property in the winter and you need to move forward, you would actually have to either, number one, move ahead without having this re-winterize so that you can check things, or have the process of the re-winterizing so that you can make sure that everything is flowing correctly in the way of, water and pipes and so on and so forth. Spring is actually most people get kind of backed away when it's raining, but spring is a good time to actually look at properties when it is, kind of like it's been outside with the extra pools of rain, because in a situation with basements or things like that, if anything is leaking or if there's an area of uncertainty, even in the way of basements and smells and so on and so forth, that's kind of a good indicator.
So this has been a great season to get out looking at houses in spring then, because if there's any water problems there, they're going to be pretty evident right now, I would imagine. Well, we're talking to Misty Morris with Remax, Encore, and Clarkson about flipped homes and what buyers, should be aware of. So if I'm a buyer and I do find a property that I want to purchase, I've listened to your advice. We've gone through, we've really tried to take a critical eye to it. We've had an inspector comes in. Is there anything specifically that we should be doing when it comes time to getting ready to make an offer on the house?
As far as making the offer itself is concerned, number one, obviously, once you know that you've seen the house, that you love it, you definitely can prepare the offer, submit it. I would definitely suggest that either in the track of submitting the offer or once your offer is accepted, to just go back out for a second look.
Okay.
First-time buyers, I always recommend, they bring a friend with them or maybe bring their parents just as a second set of eyes. Number one is those visuals. People get caught up in that. And number two, you are seeing things the first go round, but when you go back a second time, you realize how many things you missed.
Exactly.
And then following up to that, once the offer is accepted, the home inspection, like we said, is number one. Definitely having a home inspector come out, take a look at the property. And then there's some other additional things. You can request seller's disclosures so that you can kind of see and highlight what the owner might disclose about the property in general. And then following up to that, you can also request pre-title work, which pre-title work is done whenever a property is listed. And it's just kind of a backtrack to make sure that taxes are paid on the property. And it kind of gives you a little bit more background where you can verify to make sure there's no existing liens or any encumbrances on the property.
Which may be a little, which is important in any property, but I'm going to assume when you've got, maybe a contractor or a company that's flipping homes, you really do want to make sure that there are no liens or any other sticky wickets that could be coming your way on that. So if you're buying a flipped home, you're talking about, ask for the seller's disclosure, make sure that the pre-title's coming in to talk to them about any liens or encumbrances there. Does the type of loan that you're getting make any difference if you're buying a flipped house?
The type of loan really doesn't make a difference, only in the time frame. Conventional is usually about a 30-day time period to close. FHA would be 45 days, and then VA usually about 45 to 60. So outside of that, really not a whole lot of difference. The biggest thing with FHA and VA funding would be making sure that there are no obvious safety or hazard issues.
Okay.
So if this is a flipper that doesn't have a lot of experience and perhaps they're leaving things undone or exposed, or they've cut corners and left certain things open and undone, then those could come back to be items that need to be repaired in order to close on the property.
Alrighty. Well, thanks so much to Misty Morris for sharing tips for those looking to buy a flipped home. Buying a flipped home can be a wonderful thing. You may find that these homes are maybe more move-in ready. Maybe they've got some of the updates you were hoping to have, but you do want to protect yourself in your big financial investment by having that critical eye in asking the right questions. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at why the home ownership rate for African Americans in Metro Detroit is below 50%. What led us here, and what are 3 important things that can be done to get you on the path to home ownership. And a reminder that throughout the month of June is the annual Parade of Homes event going on now. You can get more information by going to a local Remax office or paradehba.com. Stay tuned for more Remax Real Estate Insights here on 760 WJR.